Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1089th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs at the Rail, and I have the joy of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Nengi Omuku and Lilly Wei. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Nengi Omuku is celebrated for vibrant oil paintings that draw evocatively from the natural world. Her solo exhibition at Kasmin, Wild Things and Perennials, the subject of today's dialogue, marks her debut in New York, showcasing 8 new paintings on sanyan, a traditional Nigerian textile. Omuku lives and works between Lagos and London. And our host today, New York-based independent curator, writer, journalist, and critic, Lilly Wei, writes on global contemporary art and emerging art and artists, reporting frequently on international exhibitions and biennials. She's written for dozens of publications here and abroad, including The Rail, and is a longtime contributor to Art in America and a contributing editor to Art News. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Lilly to get us started.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you, Chloe, and thank you, Nengi. And yes, hello to Nengi from London, where she is now. I thought we would start by just looking at the images to get an idea of the range of Nengi's work, and so we'll start with this show that's up right now in Bristol in the UK at the Arnolfini, and it's called The Dance of People and the Natural World, which you immediately get what one of her main themes are. And then if we'll scroll through that, we'll look at a few instances. And then we'll go to Nengi's show at Paul Kasmin, which is called Wild Things and Perennials, which also features nature as a principal theme. And let's look at some of those images. There are 8 paintings there. I think most are from this year. And actually, though, of course, since I think most of the people who are in on this this discussion they are based in New York. So please go and take a look at the show, which is up through October 24th. In fact, not only do I urge you to look at this show in person, I think that we should always look at shows in person, so you can get some of the idea of scale and the subtlety of the color and of the fabric of the materials. So anyway, let's finish this. So you can get an idea of her very actually delicate palette. And that fabric that is called sanyan, SANYAN, which is an indigenous material, or at least it's indigenously crafted. Studio, actually, Nengi, this is just your studio in London, or
Lagos.
I mean,
in Lagos.
Yeah. In Liverpool. Okay. Is this your principal studio?
Yes, it is. So I work from home in London. I work in London because my parents live here. So I wanted to be closer to them. So it's a practical decision to also be in London. But my actual studio is in Lagos, Nigeria. This one, yeah.
This one, okay. No. As I said, we could all have a studio envy anyway. No, it's good. It's great. Okay, so Nengi, just to start with, are you one of those enviable people who always knew what they wanted to do? Did you know that you wanted to be an artist?
Yes, ever since like I was 11.
Yeah.
Ever since I was 11, I went to, so originally I thought I was going to be a violinist. It's actually funny. And but then I went to secondary school in Nigeria and I did my first art class, and I just completely fell in love with watercolors. And I wrote a letter to my parents. I was just like, I am going to be an artist. And which is an unusual thing in Nigeria, because in Nigeria it's very strict, and you have to either be a lawyer or a doctor or one of the serious professions. But my parents were very, very open and just very supportive, and they took me to meet established artists and showed them my drawings and asked what they thought, and they gave feedback, and it encouraged them to keep encouraging me, I guess.
So, and then you studied. I mean, you went to London, and how did you get there? What was the
Yeah.
impetus?
Yeah, so I was in Nigeria up until I was like 16 or 17. Then I came to England, did my A levels, and then I got in straight away into the Slade School of Fine Art. And I'd always wanted to go there. One of my heroes, Ben Ewomo, went there. So I was like, oh, this is where I want to go. So I was very lucky to get in. So I was in England for about 8 years, A levels, and then my bachelor's and my master's, studying art. And then immediately after, I moved back to Nigeria.
So what did you focus on when you were studying?
So originally, I came in with a complete sculpture portfolio. I don't know if some people on here would know the Benin bronzes, and we have a huge history of making sculptures in Nigeria, and that was a lot of what we referenced when we were in school. So I used to make a lot of heads, like portrait busts. But Philida Barlow was my first tutor when I came into the Slade, but she knew, because on the side I was making these secret paintings because I really always wanted to paint. I just didn't know how to get into oil painting. Oil painting wasn't something I'd explored before the Slade. And it was Philida Barlow that encouraged me when she saw the painting, she was just like, I think you should give this a go. And at the time, I was like, oh, why is Philida Barlow kicking me out of sculpture? But in the end, it worked out. And it's just, I needed to take that step. And then I was painting for the rest of the 5 years there.
Um, was it a bit of a culture shock at 15 to go to London, or not? Were you comfortable?
Ooh, it was the most extreme culture shock. I remember it like it was yesterday because I left the tropics and went to Shaftesbury in Dorset, so the English countryside, and we were wearing kilts. Even so, it was extremely cold. It was wild, but eventually I got used to it, and came into London, and yeah.
Okay. And then you went back to Nigeria at what age about, or
Oh, so this was 2012. I moved back to Nigeria 2012. I don't remember how old I was then, but 2012 was when I moved back. And I've lived there ever since. I just go back and forth.
uh-huh. Because it was right after you graduated, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
I mean, because you said, and I'm quoting you here, part of the reason you moved back to Nigeria was because you felt European art history was rather heavy for you, and there was something missing. And I like this. It was the soul of my practice, and home was missing. So then you re-immersed yourself in Lagos, but which isn't your hometown though, right?
No.
So and now you said you're becoming more balanced in your practice. So could you discuss that a little, or?
Yeah, I think really I was homesick because I wanted to feel sort of like at one with the space. I wanted to feel, I didn't really want to feel like an outsider in the place where I lived. And I don't get that in Nigeria. So I think that was part of the main decision. It's just also I was learning about oil painting and this fantastic way of expressing myself, which eventually became the language I was most comfortable with. But it felt like the soul of the work, the heart of my practice was just sort of like was leaving me, and I needed some sense of grounding, I think, which is why I decided to move back and just re-immerse myself in Nigeria. And I moved around. So I was in Ibadan first for a year, Western Nigeria. And then I moved to Port Harcourt, which is where my family is from, and then eventually moved to Lagos.
Uh-huh. And then if anyone, those who have either seen the show or know your work or have just been looking at these images, will notice that your support, your principal material is sanyan, and which is indigenous to Nigeria, that area, West Africa, Yoruba crafts.
Mhm.
And could you talk about that and how you came to it? Because I think it was a very important moment in your life when you did come to it.
It was. So the funny thing is, after being in England for so long, when I moved back to Nigeria, I felt like an outsider again because I hadn't traveled back home so much, and so I was just sort of taking things in. I didn't really make any paintings for a year, and I was just sort of looking and and just trying to understand where I was again. And my re-entry point really was textiles. I was noticing how everybody could be identified by what they were wearing. If they were in traditional dress, one could immediately tell, is this person from northern Nigeria, southern Nigeria, west, east. You could easily identify where a person was from based on their dress. And that was also a very grounding factor for me. And so since I was floating and trying to find footing, textiles became that footing for me. So I would paint different people dressed in their traditional dress. So they would sit for me in their traditional dress, and I'll make a painting with the drapery and everything, like almost like old history paintings or whatever. And from there, so when I was in Ibadan, I made my first painting of someone dressed in a specific textile. I went to Port Harcourt and I made paintings of people dressed in that kind of textile that they wore in River State. And then I came to Lagos, and I had always known that the Yoruba people were known for ashoke. Ashoke means, I think, family cloth. And ashoke, so I asked people to please bring the first version. So I asked the older people to show me the first versions of this textile that they knew. And that was when a friend called me and was like, come see my collection of vintage ashoke, and which is vintage sonyo. So at that time, I was painting in Nigeria, and I couldn't find canvas that was good quality enough, like I would find in England. You could just get on the Jacksons or whatever and just order extremely great canvas. But I couldn't find good canvas. So at the same time, as a young artist, I was having to import canvas from England because I've always been very particular about the surface of the painting. And so when I saw this sonyo, immediately the visual similarities to linen, that was the first thing that struck me. I was like, this looks like linen. It feels heavier and denser than linen. And it's already stood the test of time, because I started researching and I found out that it was a pre-colonial textile. And so it had existed for this long, had been passed down from generation to generation. And that's when I realized it was time to stop painting textiles and find a way to sort of collaborate with the material as a surface.
So I understood that this particular textile, I understand has been used very ceremonially, for special occasions. I mean, clothing for special occasions, and that you've taken some of these vintage, costumes, or wedding dresses or funeral clothing, and that you have unstitched them.
Yes.
And then incorporated them into your paintings. I mean, was that the first thing you did? Because we'll talk about later what you did, okay?
Yes. Yeah, so if you see it, this is a perfect image to just rest on for a minute. For people that haven't seen the show, you see that their small strips make up the painting, and yes, it was used as a ceremonial dress, which was like a wrap skirt for women and men, but it's the women's clothes I use because the women's clothes were basically just panels that were tied around as a sort of like a wrap skirt and a crossing sash and a headpiece, which the Yoruba people call gele. And so the first thing is, and on the front of the dress were always these intricate embroidery or patterns that were just very beautiful. So I knew that if I was going to work with this textile, I wanted to also show the rich history and rich craftsmanship of it. So it was important for me that I wasn't painting over the embroidery and all of that, so that people have a sense of the history of this material. And sometimes people would write their names. So I found vintage ones where people signed their names because it's really like it's a prestigious thing to own, and it's a thing of pride to be able to pass this textile down from one generation to the next. So I first unstitched the panels just because it's hand woven in small panels and stitched together to make the skirt or the scarf. So I will stitch it and then reverse the stitches. So actually all the paintings are made on the back of the sanyan, and the front is what you see when you walk around the piece.
I also read somewhere that what is embroidered into, or stitched into the sanyan are prayers sometimes, some kind of symbols. So does it have a kind of talismanic quality, or?
Yes. So sometimes, for example, if a woman wanted a child and had wanted a child for a very long time, they could sort of commission a specific textile from the weaver. Or a specific textile could be commissioned or bought. And those textiles will have sort of symbols of fertility for the woman to wear just as she moved around. And that sort of functioned in a way as a prayer for the child to come. So there were things like that, and it's also, they were also made in also like it's a heavy, the part of Nigeria where the textile is produced is also very heavy Muslim society, and sometimes they would weave symbols of from there's this Islamic prayer sort of tablets that somehow was sometimes woven as symbols into the textile. But we will talk about this probably in the future, but we started commissioning new sanyan, and it was important for me because with the old textiles that I painted on, I had that weight, sort of like the weight of the prayers and all the symbols constantly heavy on my mind, and I needed some sort of neutrality. So, but I'll talk to you probably about how we got to creating abstract patterns.
Well, anyway, yeah, because I was thinking, and just quickly, it's the idea. I think the originals sanyans were silk. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So the original ones were made from silk, from moss that they got from northern Nigeria, and anafe moss, and it was hand spun with industrial cotton that they found in the western Nigeria. So there's a history of trade as well that is captured through this textile, and it was woven together. So it had a sort of different and softer feel, and yes, it was woven together, and it wasn't traditionally speaking, it wasn't washed after it was worn. It was hand beaten with a mallet to sort of like dry clean and iron, and then air dried in the sun, and then saved for the next occasion. So it was a special occasion dress. You probably wear it like once a year or something like this. Yeah.
Because of course, actually, since I'm Chinese, and silk is sort of indigenous to China. I mean, and they're very proud of their silk industry. And I was just curious how silk or that practice got to Western Africa.
Yeah. So I don't know. I know it was traded from northern Nigeria, and it came from the moth cocoon. So it was boiled, and the cocoon. So when the cocoons were boiled, the silk thread was released, and that was what was eventually hand spun with the cotton. Yeah.
Okay, so then we can talk a little bit about what I think you alluded to before, which is you learned to spin cotton, and the the textile sanyan became then cotton, and you learned to do that, and then as again as a resurrection of an indigenous practice. So would you discuss that a bit?
So when I used to go to the vintage markets and look for sonyo, and people always sold new versions of ashoke. It was really difficult to find sonyo. You have to sort of like go into the back corners of the market, and once in a while you do find sonyo. Other times people don't bring out their vintage sonyo to sell, and that's when it occurred to me that this was an art that was actually dying out. The art of hand spinning the thread before weaving. So I became quite obsessive and I wanted to know about the thread and how the thread was made and how it was hand spun and how the thread went through this process of changing from cotton into a string. And so that journey kind of, it took me to Dakar, to Senegal. I did a residency at Black Rock, and that's where I learned how to spin cotton. I told them specifically, this is why I'm coming here. I haven't yet found cotton spinners in Nigeria, and I want to learn how to spin cotton. And once I learned how to do that, it's a very magical process. It was this village in Senegal, no cars, and you just have this community of people. This young woman, her name is Fatim, her company is called Fali, took me to meet the cotton spinners. She commissioned 200 women to spin cotton to make new kinds of rugs and bags and different things. And you feel it change. You feel it sort of bounce and change into a thread. And it's just a memory that didn't leave me. And I came back to Nigeria with new, revived energy. And I was like, I'm going to find cotton spinners in this place. And we reached out to all our friends, everybody we knew. And finally, we found this family of cotton spinners in Western Nigeria. And we went up to them and we said, this is what we're trying to do. We want to commission sonyo, and that is what they were specialized in making, and I would want to commission that. And so now we commission, so this is new sonyo, and in some of the images you'll see the show in Kasmin actually the split, half and half, vintage and new sonyo. There's one with green lines, that's vintage, and then this painting, small groups, is made on new sonyo.
So you use this family exclusively, basically?
Yeah. No. What do you mean? No. Do you mean they make sonyo for other people?
No, but what I mean is you use them exclusively.
Yes, just this.
Okay, yeah. All right. And so I mean, do you work in a way collaboratively or not? I mean, do you think of it as a kind of community, because that kind of work, weaving, is often associated with women and in communities. So does that happen in your practice now?
So actually, the most of the cotton spinners and weavers we work with are men. In Nigeria, yeah, I know it's unusual. I think it's unusual. But most of cotton spinners and weavers I've seen in Ibadan and across in because we've also been to Isanya as well, have been men. There are few women, but it's not often you find that it's women that are spinning and weaving. We have a relationship with them, but my studio is very far away from where they it's about a 5 or 6 hour drive, and it takes them months to make. So we commission in bulk, and we just allow them take their time with that. Yeah, but we have a relationship with them, but it's not like it's attached to my studio. Yeah.
Well, no, that was my other question. I said, well, do men weave? And you just answered it. Yeah, that's good for them. Okay. Has Yinka Shonobari's practice influenced you at all with his Kenta Club and others who have honed in on fabrics, on tapestries, and all of their implications?
Yeah. Yinka Shonobari was probably the biggest influence on my practice. One of the biggest influences on my practice in terms of just his approach to research. Before I encountered his work, I always knew Ankara, that's the textile he usually works with for it, the highly patterned, very colorful fabric. I always thought it was an indigenous Nigerian African textile, until he through his work showed it was a Dutch wax print. And I always thought that. So it encouraged me really when I went back that first time in 2012, after being away for so long, to think about textiles differently, to think about and to just dig deeper at what I was looking at. Because in where I'm from, for example, we wear a heavy woolen textile that has lots of animal heads on it. And wearing heavy wool in Nigeria is not the natural thing you would gravitate towards in such a hot, humid climate. And it was through research I found that these were former colonial blankets that we've repurposed into traditional dress. And so we've taken that colonial history and transformed it into something else for us. So I think that's where Yinka's practice was so instrumental to me.
Yeah, because it does show, all this kind of, I guess, back and forth, this kind of revolving door influence, and how what seems to be from one culture has been impacted by another, etc.
Exactly. Yes,
it's very complicated. And
yes.
Anyway, let's see. You also said, by the way, that when you started using I'm mispronouncing it all the time because I was listening to you and I just forgot again. But you say Sunyun?
So it's like saying Sonia.
Sonia.
But it's Sonyo. That's Sonyo.
Yeah, because I didn't even ask you because it looks so evident. SANYAN.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. So you said that it influenced your palette too, that it changed it from being very vivid into something that was more muted.
Yes, absolutely. With my paintings, I wish we had some images of my earlier work. It was extremely vibrant. I think people see my work now and they think it is colorful and vibrant, but compared to what I was doing before, my colors were almost primary. And then I encountered this vintage textile that had this history. And it occurred to me that if I continued with this palette, all of this was a subconscious conversation. It's not like it was a logical thing that I was processing, but it would look like an alien invasion on a vintage textile if I approached it with the same vibrant and hot colors that I used in the past. So my colors gradually, just organically, started shifting towards some things that would make sense on this textile, and it was not something I was in control of, but it's just something that started happening. But now that I'm working with the new Sonyo, I recently made a painting that was red. And I was so excited about it. It's in the show. It's called Small Groups, and I wasn't going to put it in the show. I was just like, oh my goodness, it's very bright. but yeah, so that was sort of the palette I worked with in the past. Yeah.
So you also talk about the merging of West African traditions and European practices. Mm-hmm. So one example of that, as you've mentioned, is the use of oil. Mm. Is what are traditional materials instead of oil? Oil is pretty Western, and that happens across Asia too. So you know, and other countries that. But you did like oil, and would you talk about that?
I fell in love with oil. I think it's just because I feel it's very generous and also very forgiving. As opposed to like acrylics, I feel like you can approach it and it sort of like waits for you. it's in a way it waits for you to change your decisions, and the way I use oil is probably not how it's always used in a traditional sense, but like I use it almost like a watercolor. Mm-hmm. I sometimes I apply it in thin washes and I take things away, and sometimes I build on it, and I think the range of ways in which I use oils, you will see throughout the show, all of the paintings are handled in very different ways. So yeah, that's I think why I fell in love with the material. It's the flexibility it gives you, and when you're working with it.
Are there other ways you think you've melded Western and West African practices or Nigerian Yoruba practices?
So in I think in studying art history, we looked a lot at old history paintings, and I think thinking about perspective and also landscape. I think the primary influence I think I would say of Western art on me, I think, is my encounter with the Impressionists. Because I think when I was making work when I moved to Nigeria, I was making work about the heavy things that were happening in the political situation and things like that. And I'm a gardener and a florist, and that's what I trained as after I left art school for 5 years. And I wanted to paint plants, but I didn't know how to approach that. So in some of my paintings, some of them in the Dance of People in the Natural World, one of the first paintings I made of someone holding a plant, it's called Still Life. I left the plant blank because I didn't know how to approach painting that plant. But when I went to France, I did a residency in France, and I saw a lot of the Impressionists. Well, Monet's water lilies, and I visited his garden, and I was just like, I get it. And I was just like, this is something I know intimately, and this is something I want to incorporate in my practice. And I realized that it's okay to paint plants and flowers. And so I started immediately painting them. Yeah. So I think that's amazing. The Impressionists have had a huge impact on my practice as well.
Well, besides the Impressionists and all of that, your mother. How about your mother? Was she was a horticulturist? And,
Yes.
so
Yes, yes. My mom.
give her some credit too.
Yes, 100, no, 100%. And so that one was just of the Western influences, but my mom probably has had the biggest impact on my practice. Growing up, my mom is a horticulturist and a florist, and she built the first garden center in Port Harcourt. Port Harcourt is a very interesting place. So for somebody to come into that space and think, I'm going to build a garden center is not the natural inclination. You think maybe, yeah, I'll build a school or a hospital. But for my mom, it was like, let's re-inject beauty back into this space that has been completely built up and
industrial, isn't it? It's very industrial.
It is very industrial. It's an oil city.
Yeah.
So we produce oil, and the attention has shifted away from most other things and has just gone towards oil. And because of the oil drilling and everything, there's a lot of pollution. So my mom looked at this environment, got land, and built the largest garden center there. And that's where I worked for 5 years as a gardener, learning how to make compost from everything and learning how to do floral arranging. And growing up as well, I grew up always with her drawing different arrangements and different landscape design. So that's the hugest impact on my practice. And this shift towards landscape and nature, I think, is something that had been subconsciously running around in my mind pretty much since I was born, and just became a reality recently. It just got unlocked recently for me because of my mom.
Well, it's also been discussed that you said that your work is a reclamation of land from a colonialist, post-colonialist history. Would you call yourself an activist artist?
So full
Is that funny?
So that was an essay written about my work. I'm always happy for people to translate the paintings. But I would call myself an activist. I think I have probably activist views. There are things that are happening in the world that I think are very strange. And I think that we've turned the world into something, we're gradually turning the world into something that's very ugly. And which is really what the show is about: wild things happening in the world, and the fact that we have this beautiful place with perennials and plants and nature, this place that we've been given, and why not refocus on that instead of on destruction. So I think it's up to people to decide if I'm an activist or not.
Well, you also talk about, I think that you wanted to create a space of calm, of enduring greenery, of plants and nature,
Yeah.
a safe space, I suppose, in a very tumultuous world. Like right now in West Africa, I mean, they're experiencing severe flooding, and there is so many deaths at this very moment. So, anyway, so
Yes,
yeah.
even in Nigeria, the experiences that I was having at the time were both chaotic and calm, and I guess that is what I was trying to talk about. Really, the show at Kasmin isn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was just going to be purely landscapes, but then I experienced so many chaotic things. Just our elections were stolen in Nigeria, and people like me that were living in Lagos, that were not from Lagos, were being told to go back home. So it's that sense of feeling like an alien in a place that you've called home, and just this sense of hostility that rose up. And then I was having so many other strange things that happened in my studio. Like there was a fire in the studio, then my studio flooded. So it was about trying to document the downs really in life, and just think about hope. Because what do you do when you experience all of these things? Do you quit? Like, because at some point I was just like, I just give up. But painting became a sustaining force for me. It became sort of like a perennial, like that ever living, ever breathing sustenance. Personally, for me, painting became a necessity, and that's what the show is about. I think, yeah.
I saw an image of a work of yours called Eden,
Yes.
and it was enormous. And another reason, by the way, that when you started commissioning your material, you could go up to any scale, right? Because before you were limited by what you could. But anyway, so this Eden was an enormous work, and then you had actual plants and all kinds of flora out around it. So with that, what was your idea of Eden then?
Yeah, so it was again like just looking at the world, and just thinking about destruction. And I feel things deeply, and I think I was just feeling overwhelmed by the fact that it wasn't a beautiful place. It was gradually not becoming a beautiful place. And I think Eden was made to sort of think about this imaginary landscape where people were just passing through the landscape. There was no hierarchy. People weren't elevated above the landscape. In fact, the landscape was what consumed the space, and people just sort of like floated through, sat and chatted and laughed and rolled around, and the landscape just did what it was meant to do. And so it's a vision of the world that I saw in my mind that I wanted to share, because sometimes the paintings happen and it's sort of like a vision in my head, and I just sort of like throw that out. And sometimes it's things that I've witnessed. So yeah, that's where Eden comes from.
Do you think of Africa at a time when it was not a desert, or when it was a space of greenery, a very abundant, a foliated place? Did that enter your thinking? Your mythos? I mean, as a garden of
Yeah.
Eden itself?
Yeah. That's the thing. It wasn't limited to just Africa. It's the world. Because some of the paintings, for example, in the show, are protest pieces. And I was thinking about elections being stolen. Even in America, things are happening that are really weird. So I think
Yeah.
globally, it feels like we've all lost our minds, and in a way, it's realizing that my center is Nigeria, my center is Lagos, my center is Victoria Island where I live, but there are things that are happening within that center that are reverberating globally, strange things that are happening. And it's about thinking about good things that can ground us all, regardless of where we are or where we're from, which is plants and for me personally, paintings.
So you have talked about interest, about nature as healing.
Mm.
So perhaps you could discuss that, but also discuss it perhaps in context of your work with mental health patients. I
Yeah.
believe you started a foundation in Lagos, or
Yeah. So I got invited in I think 2018 by a charity called Hospital Rooms in England, where they install art by all kinds of artists, but usually established and some emerging in locked intensive care psychiatric wards as a form of therapy. So what they do is they do workshops and they also install murals across the wards in England. And I was invited in 2018, and I was just like, this is the most marvelous thing I've ever seen. And I want to do this in Lagos as well. And they were so generous and downloaded the entire template of how to do that in Nigeria. They also sent me the person who eventually became our co-founder for the charity. And we do workshops in the psychiatric ward. It's called Lagos University Teaching Hospital. And we do workshops there every month. And you can walk into the space and see some of the service users come in very agitated and very anxious, or any range of mental health issue is what we will encounter in that space. And then, but when painting begins, things change in the most dramatic way. There are no words to describe the experience. It's something that needs to be experienced. For example, there was in one of the workshops I did, but with hospital rooms, this service user came in very, very agitated and very abusive. And when she started drawing and painting, she fell silent throughout the process until the end. And at the end, we asked her, how do you feel? How did this make you feel? And she said nothing. And everybody was sort of laughing. And at the end of that conversation, she said, no, you don't understand. This is the first time that I can't hear the voices in my head. So it's about tapping in to the healing power of nature and art. I know it can't heal completely, but there is some sort of like calm that it can bring, even though temporary, even though it's short. So that's why we really do what we do in the psychiatric wards in Lagos, because we see that it's making a difference.
I'm sure it is. So let's talk about your process, and perhaps we should just maybe look at a painting. Pick a painting,
Okay.
and let's go through it. Let's talk about it.
So I'll probably talk about Orange Bougainvillea. I don't know if you have it's still of that one. It's sort of pink. Yeah, it's that one. Yeah. So there was so I was telling you I was having some chaotic moments in my life, and one of them was my studio building caught on fire. And that was shortly after the flood. I don't even remember the sequence of events, but I was completely fed up, and I just didn't know how to process it. And that was when this painting sort of was born. And it was really, I realized that I needed to tap into painting in a sort of different kind of way. And it was painting for my own mental health, to get myself from a place of darkness into light. The painting came out quite quickly and intuitively. And it sort of like saved me in that moment. What happened as well was I looked out onto the balcony after all of the flames and the ash and the smoke, and I saw my orange bougainvillea in bloom. And that is exactly what this painting came from. So in the midst of the stems and the flowers, are people integrated into the landscape, and they're actually dancing. So there's a girl that's sort of like danced across the space in the bottom sort of right, and there's a couple dancing in the corner, and some other people dancing at the top, and that's where that painting came out of. It was born out of necessity.
So, are you painting? Actually, I don't know this. Are you painting it directly on on the fabric? Or,
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought it was an extra layer. You know?
So yeah, a lot of people have asked that because the priming process is very laborious. It's something that takes about 3 days to do, and so so it's and we lay it on graduate very thinly but multiple layers so that when the work is rolled, because it's not stretched on any permanent thing, we stretch it to prime, but so that when we roll it and ship to places like Kasmin, we're confident that it comes out and just sort of like bounces back. So it's a formula that we create, and we create our own primer, and it's something that was worked on for 4 months in the studio just to make sure it was archival, and there was never going to be a situation where it gets transported and the people are complaining of cracks. So we tested it out for a very long time. So it's actually painted, it's stretched, the fabric is stretched and primed, but just primed in a very specific kind of way. Yeah.
So then it seems rather like tapestries nomadic. I mean, things that can travel well.
Yeah.
And that's also perhaps cultural. I mean, if you talk about places where people are moving around, as
Yeah.
in cultures, they take their artwork with them, and they're easily, or they're portable, and
True.
also
True.
portable, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe just talk about how you paint. What do you start with? You don't have a plan, right? Or do you? I mean, is it?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. For paintings like Orange Bougainvillea, I just sort of started. For paintings like I Can't Feel My Legs, that was a very different approach to making paintings. It's something that was layer after layer and done in a way so that you can see each layer sort of like um, peeking through, and it sort of becomes this color fields basically on the surface, and you see sort of like ripples of different colors peeking out, colors that you wouldn't expect when you walk up close to the surface. So when you see it from afar, and that's the painting is called I Can't Feel My Legs. I think we have some close-ups of that, but when you go to it, you see other colors, hot colors peeking through, but when you look at it from afar, it looks like it's muted and pastel. So it totally depends. Some paintings are intuitive and others are very planned. Um, yeah,
So,
this one.
oh yeah. And what is it? Well, what who are these people? Neng? Who are you?
Oh, so this was the first painting I did for the show actually, and I think I did it at the beginning of the year, and it was sort of like a meditation for me. It's actually where I wanted to be. I wanted to be, when you're in a plane and you're sort of looking down on the clouds and you just want to like rest in the clouds and float there. That's basically what this painting is, and of course you can't do that. So I was just like, okay, I'm going to paint it instead. And it's just people really resting, and I feel it's the energy I wanted to channel for myself at the beginning of the year, even though making the painting was the furthest thing from rest I could ever imagine. It was the most laborious painting I've ever made in my life. But I'm happy that the end result sort of communicates just resting in this sort of safe environment and safe space, and this body that's being carted across, almost like a baptism across the surface, is really what this painting is about.
Um, why are your figures so apparitional, so ghostly? I mean, in terms of the landscape, I mean, is it fair to say that that it seems to take precedence? It,
Mm-hmm.
what does that? mean?
Yeah, so I think the bodies really before the bodies came to me as a painter before the landscapes. The landscapes were it came much later. And when I came to Nigeria, I was noticing the textiles, but the first person that I noticed wearing textile was this woman that I saw constantly when I was in Ibadan, walking in the center of the highway. And she was dressed in many elaborate fabrics, just layered on her, just completely layered on her. And she was just always walking in the middle of the highway, and the cars gave her way. And she had this presence, she commanded this presence. And then the next day I'll go out and I'll see her in different textiles walking in the center of the space. And and I thought this is extremely regal, this is extremely authoritative. And it wasn't until later that I realized that she was actually mentally unwell. And that's where it started for me. I no longer wanted to make work about representation, making work about what people look like, the color of their skin, all of that, all of those things that are divisive and and almost sort of like define and pin us down. It became important for me to speak instead through the paintings about the mental space and a state of mind, which is why the bodies may begin in some of them, like NLC, you'll see I begin to paint eyes and a mouth and some definitive things, and then it dissolves back into abstraction because the priority for me is documenting what that community or what that group or the collective are feeling at that point. That NLC painting was about protest. So it's about what those people, the angst and the anxiety and the frustration that that group of people were feeling is what inspired that specific painting. And all of my work, even people sitting in landscapes, people protesting, is about the mental state of those bodies in those spaces. That's why the bodies turn out like that.
It was without color.
But yeah, without any solid definitive thing. It's this undulating abstract mark that is just moving. I guess if it was film, those marks would be moving within the body.
Yeah. They still look they're either, as I said, coming into existence or
yes, or leaving. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and you use collage too?
Yeah. Collage for me is, for paintings like I Can't Feel My Legs, collage helps me figure out the composition. Because or sometimes if I see a painting in my head, collage helps me make it a little bit more concrete before I begin painting, because otherwise approaching a blank canvas just with a white surface is the most daunting thing. So collage helps me unlock creativity in a way.
Well, you're not that daunted because your works are huge. Is that right? Is that your preferred scale? This, rather emergent?
Yes, I actually prefer to work large. It's really weird, but it's where I feel most comfortable, actually. Yeah.
And can we talk a little bit about your installations? I mean, have you always used like those rods and hanging, or have you done that for a while, or is it recent?
That's a very good question, actually. So originally, when I saw Sonia, and because I thought it looked like linen, I started stretching it on stretcher bars. So I would stretch it, and then we figured out a way to prime it, and the primer would fall out of the back like braille. And so when you feel it, it had it was in relief. So I thought this is so beautiful, and I want people to be able to see the back. So instead of hanging the paintings against the wall, we made these small plinths and attached the paintings to the plinths so you could walk around it like an object. But then it was top heavy and kept falling over. So I realized that that was not a sustainable.
Not a good idea, right?
It was not. So that's when I started thinking about how textile is presented in the world. And this is the way I had seen it done, and that's when I then had to figure out if this is how textile is presented, how do I get painting to be made in a way that textile is presented in a way. So that's when I started stretching the Sonia flat against the wall, and taping off the edge. Yeah, you can see in this one in the back. So I tape off the edge and then begin to prime, and yeah, that's how it evolved.
So yeah, so people can circulate. I mean, that's kind of the thing, and also, I mean, it's just such a I think common way for doing it that isn't Western, because Western painting tends to be framed on the wall.
Yeah.
And so maybe we should talk about titles for a minute. As a writer, I'm always interested in titles, and sometimes I feel I'm more interested in the artist's titles than the artists are. Because they said, "Oh well, we just I mean, I'm sure I know artists, do many are very specific about their titles, but maybe just I was looking at some of yours, and some of them are pretty explanatory, but I guess I should know what NLC stands for, but I don't.
No, I'll tell you. It's okay.
Okay.
So it's the Nigerian Labour Congress.
Of
And
course. Okay. I knew that.
You knew it. Yeah, Nigerian Labour Congress. So the painting was inspired when they came out to protest after, the elections were stolen, and long after, cost of living soared. People died from they could not survive anymore because of the strange things that were happening in Nigeria. And then the Nigerian Labour Congress came out to protest the devaluation of the Naira. And it was that moment that I saw. And so that painting is a collage of multiple images of that protest that I sort of like arranged in this rising perspective. So yeah, that's what that means.
And then you had something like How It Ends.
Oh, yeah, how it
sounds
ends.
Rather apocalyptic, but okay.
How it ends also comes from a dark place where, a lot of homes were being demolished in Lagos. And the people that were renting weren't aware that this was going to happen. So you just kind of wake up and you see all these people with their bulldozers coming to demolish where you live. And it's just the ridiculousness of the situation. That those, I was thinking about it from the perspective, I don't know whether the buildings were built illegally, I don't really know, but I was just thinking from the perspective of the renter, the person renting the space, and how traumatic that experience could have been, waking up and seeing all of your things just littered across the surface. So that's where that title comes from.
So basically, then your subjects are socially, politically engaged.
Yes.
So, and just what are the wild things in this? Right?
Yeah. So these are the wild things. The NLC protests, how it ends. There's another one. How it ends and the NLC protest. Sorry, off the top of my head, I'm just thinking. But those were the wild ones. And then you have the perennials and the landscapes, sort of like that were grounding in a way, and that I just wanted to bring out into the world, because chaos doesn't really happen in Nigeria. It doesn't really happen in Lagos. Yeah.
How do I get rid of that? Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
No, it's totally
fine. Well, could you perhaps briefly, because I think we're getting near our end time here, but some of the shifts between your past work and this new body of work, and what you're thinking of the next project?
Oh, at the moment my mind is not completely blank, but I have some exciting exciting things I'm thinking about. The next thing we're doing, the paintings are already finished. We're showing with Kasmin and my and Pippi. We're showing at Freeze. I was nominated by Yinka Shonibari, my hero, to do a solo booth at Freeze. So I'm very excited about that. So that's the next thing. And I think in those paintings, what you will see is landscapes that are being invaded by chaos. So it's 3 paintings that will be hung in the middle of the space. Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to that. And I thought I'd conclude with this quote from you, which I liked, and it says, I mean, something affirming in our needlessly very divisive world. And you say, for me, it's about the experience of being human, as opposed to all these things that cause division. I want anyone from any culture, race, or background to walk up to one of my works and think, this is how I feel today. And for you, you said that was a successful painting. So anyway, thank you, Nengi. And Chloe, would you like to take charge of the questions?
Thank you so much, Nengi and Lily. This has been such a pleasure to listen to. Congratulations again to you, Nengi, for this really brilliant show. I have a couple of questions, and I encourage folks in the audience to submit your questions via the form in the chat, and we'll turn to you as well. But the first question is going to be from Magli. Magli, go ahead.
Hi, Nengi. Thank you again so much for such a wonderful conversation, and I can't wait to go see this show. I wanted to ask about the representation in your paintings because you briefly mentioned how there's an intentional lack of representation in how you portray your figures. So I wanted to know if there are any other stories that you're aiming to convey through them.
Yeah, so it's sort of where sort of Lily ended. It's really about the human experience. It's how we're going through life, both the good and the bad things, and just communicating that through both the absence of specificity within the body and as well as the sort of environment that is surrounding the body. So whether it's an environment of protest or an environment that's a landscape or a skyscape or it's bodies in sort of crowded together, which is like a group of friends. So it's about the feelings, really, the state of the mind of the individual and the feelings that are communicated in that space. So representation really isn't a priority for me within the paintings.
Thank you. I think it's really easy to forget how interdependent we are. And I feel like your work does a great job of kind of showing us that we're all here together, experiencing many of the same things together.
Yeah, and some of the things are really difficult, and some of the things are really good, and it's just about just documenting how we're experiencing these things, and just trying to communicate that in the simplest way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Magli. And thank you, Nengi, for that answer. I have a couple of questions for you if you'll have them. I am curious if you can talk a little bit about the edges of the sanyan and especially like the bottoms, which sometimes cascade or undulate. And how do you decide what to do with the bottoms?
So it was so fascinating when I saw the textiles the first time, because when you see the like, let's say the wrap skirt, it looks like a panel, like just a rectangle. But when we took the stitches out and reversed the stitches, that's when you find that each of the strips has been molded to the body of the person that wore it. So they are no longer even lengths. I don't know. I don't know if I'm explaining this properly. So then, what you have is when you restitch it, is you have varying lengths in the textile. And I thought this is the most beautiful thing. And of course, I didn't want to waste any part of the fabric. And I said, yeah, I'm going to keep it all. We're just going to go with the flow because visually it is very, very intriguing. And so it comes from use, really. That's where it comes from. Yeah.
I love it. It's really interesting when you're in the space and you can see the different lengths of the works and you. My other question, I was really, really just so intrigued to learn that you're a gardener and that you arrange flowers as well, which has so much relationship to a daily practice of convening with nature, attending something over a long period of time. And I'm curious if gardening has changed your relationship to painting and if painting has changed your relationship to gardening.
Absolutely. I think it's just gardening changing my relationship to painting. I don't think I've been able to influence nature in any way. And actually the greatest impact I think from flowers and plants is flower arranging. My mom taught me a lot about floral arranging and composition within the arrangement. I didn't realize that's something you think about when you're arranging flowers. I just thought you bunch them together. But my mom kept hammering it into me. You need to bunch the colors. You can't just spread things around. Color blocking and space and depth within the floral arrangement are all things that I learned about from my mother. And these are things that have translated directly into my paintings. And also those are elements she uses for landscape design as well, when she's designing a space, points of interest and points that are breathers, like a lawn, for example, will be a breather. And then you have hotbeds with different colors. So even within my paintings, there are blank spaces and spaces that I leave untouched, because if the entire space is intense, it's almost like it blocks the viewer out from getting into the work. So I think those were the biggest lessons for me from landscape and floral arranging.
I love it. Thank you so, so much for today. Dialogue and conversation. It's been such a pleasure to listen to. And I would especially like to thank the team at Kasmin, especially Molly, Kristen, and Mateo, who were so supportive in preparing for today's event. And I'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor this program and make weekday conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, where you'll be able to watch this shortly. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, our staff, and our operations. You can support us through the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation on the occasion of Mark Rothko paintings on paper at the National Museum in Oslo with Christopher Rothko, Adam Greenhalgh, Karianne Omundsen, Stein Ustvedt, and Harry Cooper. And with that, I am going to throw open the microphones and allow everyone to say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for being here today. And thank you so much, Nengi and Lily, for your beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nengi.
Thanks, Lily.
So much.
Thank you, Nengi. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And go see the show, everybody.
All right, thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.